Right now, though, we're going back to legal news with Andrew Eborn, a futurist, barrister and broadcaster, with Eborn's Greatest Writs. A very good evening to you, Andrew.
A very good evening to you too, Petrie. Can I say what a delight it is that you have raised the bar with the Justice League, and we have all sides of the world of the legal profession represented. So well done to you.
Wasn't he brilliant?
Oh, I loved it. I love listening to that. And what I like as well, Petrie, on Monday it'll be 60 years since Martin Luther King made his I Have a Dream speech on the 28th of August 1963 on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Well, I can tell you, I have a dream that we get more lawyers on your programme. So yes. I think that'd be glorious.
Listen, I'm happy with that. I want to start talking to you about something that's been in the papers just very, very recently, and that is the idea that the NHS managers must now face the law for their part in the deaths that Lucy Letby was able to carry out. There have been some suggestions of corporate manslaughter if it's proved that they were negligent. And from what we've been seeing, it certainly seems that there were some very big issues with the management within the NHS. Where do you stand on that? Is it an easy thing to try? Is it a difficult thing to try?
Well, firstly, without a doubt, it's been one of the most harrowing cases we've heard for a very long time. The media, very rightly, has spent a lot of time discussing it and looking into it. There are loads of questions to be asked, and these things will take a significant amount of time, and culpability needs to make sure that it is in the right place so these things don't happen again. And it's very important that justice, like democracy, dies in darkness. So we need to shine a spotlight on these various aspects, work out how these came about in the first place, because there were warning signs from what we understand, and for whatever reason, out of fear or other elements, those warning signs weren't heeded. And I think we need to shine that spotlight as quickly as we can. And there's also a big call about all sorts of things, changing the law, about making basically people who've been found guilty, make sure they stand in front of the court and hear the verdict that's presented to them. And there's all sorts of arguments, both sides on that sort of side as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've been persuaded that perhaps, although, in my heart, that's exactly what I would want to have happen, my head has slightly taken over in realising that these people may grandstand, they may upset the families more, they may make a mockery of the sentencing, that they would be able to delay sentencing for days on end, and things like that, because these are not normal minds that we're talking about.
And that's absolutely right. That would make it significantly worse for the families. They may not get what they hope.
Yeah.
And it was all brought about because of basically the demands, if you like, of what was called the Victim Personal Statement Scheme, which was introduced by the Home Office in 1996. And this was basically to give the victims the opportunity to explain how the crime made them feel, and have their interests taken into account in terms of judgment and punishment and so on and so forth. But you're absolutely right, there are difficulties and dangers with that, because you may not get the result you want, and the risk that the person who's been convicted actually mocks them or makes light of the sentence or whatever is pretty outrageous. There's also pressure on the court staff and so on and so forth if they have to force them. But using technology so you can have a feed down to the cells and to the courtroom as well may achieve that result.
Yeah, that seems like it's going to be the most likely outcome, because they do need to face the music, but perhaps not the way we all hoped that they would. Legal challenges surrounding OpenAI and ChatGPT and DALL-E.
Yes, absolutely. So every week and every day there are stories about AI and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And as you know, I speak around the world encouraging people to seize the opportunities, but also warning of the risk. And I pointed out that Stephen Hawking basically said it's our greatest human achievement, but also the biggest existential threat. But having a look at that, for example, today's report in the Times, it says scientists have used AI to identify subtypes of Parkinson's disease. Right. So there are going to be seismic changes in terms of what's going to be achieved. But there are risks, and the risks are twofold. Is one, it's about the input, and the other is the output. Now, the input is how the AI gets its material. And there's all sorts of issues about privacy, about copyright, about defamation, and so on and so forth. So there are a number of actions which is probably worth looking at. One's called an action against GitHub, which is to do with lines of code, and all the sort of computer programmers out there are very grateful for GitHub Copilot because it makes their life a lot easier, where you can get whole lines of code suggested to you. The trouble is this AI is reliant on lots of material being put into it. So in November last year, Matthew Butterick, he put together a class action lawsuit with various others to take against GitHub because they alleged there were billions upon billions of lines of this computer code which was infringed in order to feed this machine. Now, that particular case is going to be decided in September, and then probably September the 14th, a judge will decide the case on that sort of thing. But it does bring into question about this sort of input and where the material is coming from. And it's not just about computer code as well, but you also get copyright work such as authors. So Paul Tremblay and Mona Award, who you may know, Paul Tremblay was the author of the fabulous The Cabin at the End of the World, and Mona Award is known for her works like Bunny and 13 Ways of Looking at a Fat Girl, gloriously titled. And basically what they're saying is that there's lots of these summaries of these books. Suddenly putting, if you tap into Chat GPT, you get a summary of these books. And they're alleging, well, hang about, if this has happened, it means that you must have put in our copyright work into the machine in the first place. So it's raising all of those sort of interesting issues, and it's sort of cutting across all sorts of other cases as well on that premise. And we've just had the Edinburgh Festival and the best joke, with which they talk about that sort of basis. Comedians themselves are worried about the material that's being taken. So Sarah Silverman, a wonderful comedian in the States, and she's got a memoir called The Bedwetter. So she basically, with a couple of other authors, Christopher Golden and Richard Kadri, they're suing OpenAI and Meta, the company that owns Facebook. And what they're saying is that, again, they see that these summaries that produced of their work could only have come about, they allege, because their original works were input.
Well, they must have been. They must have been read to be summarised. So the website that used that AI has now been shut down, hasn't it?
Well, some of them have, that's right. Yeah. Some authors have put pressure on that sort of side. But there are others out there. So ChatGPT and OpenAI and so on and so forth have those sort of things. But creative artists, I mean, as yourself, I don't know many people know this, but you are a brilliant artist. And I whenever I have an opportunity, I sing the praises of Petrie as an artist, because you have a real talent. But you do. We should see more of it. But as an artist, you will understand that if your work is taken and you aren't recompensed for it, then that has got to be wrong. And so we need to look at these things. We need to look at the rights owners, get them round the table to talk about sensible ways of rewarding them. And some of the big music companies are now doing exactly that. They're looking at Universal and sit down and say, well, okay, how can we use AI for our benefits? And you get glorious artists such as Grimes who will turn on and say, look, I don't mind my work being used as long as there's a fair mechanism for paying for it. And basically the heart and soul of the dispute at the moment in Hollywood, you've got the actors on strike, and it's the first time since 1960 that both the actors and indeed the writers have gone out on strike. And in 1960, it was Ronald Reagan and Charlton Heston who were at the forefront of it all. And this is all to do with not just residuals, but also about AI and how that's going to replace actors and those in the profession. And they're saying, and by way of example, they could take some background artists, do one day's filming with them, and then they'd have enough material to last forever, so that they would never need to engage those artists ever again, and they could replicate them in all sorts of movies going forward.
I mean, that is just shocking, isn't it? Just very quickly, the AI created art. So this is art created completely by AI. It would have taken reference from other artists. Isn't copyrightable, but that seems to make sense. I didn't think it would be, because it's not been created by a person.
Well, that's right. I mean, as you rightly say, human authorship is a bedrock requirement for copyright. Yeah. And it was confirmed again by a federal judge at the end of last week on Friday, and they were holding a US Copyright Office that a piece of art, if it's solely created by AI, then it's not open to protection. And we had a similar case last year with Zarya of the Dawn and the author Chris Kashtanova. And basically what happened there, they used a particular program called Mid-Journey to create images. And they said, well, the book itself will have copyright protection for parts of the book which the author created. But the images produced solely by Midjourney will not. Now, I was, as you know, at the AI conference with Rishi Sunak and various other, the great and the good of the industry. We talked about this. And they're saying that actually AI doesn't just do it. AI is being used as a tool by people to help in the creative process. And people need to turn around and adjust it and put their own sort of artistic input. The wording that you give, the instructions that you give to the machine basically needs to be worded in a particular way to get the right results and so on and so forth. So it's not as easy in just saying it's turning around on that premise and saying that that's what's going to happen. So that's why I sort of it's very, very important that we sort of look at the artistic process, what's actually involved in it, to sort of make that make sense. Because in English law, under the Copyright Designs and Patents Act of 1988, a work which is produced by a computer or with the assistance of a computer can be afforded copyright protection. And the person who owns that copyright is the person who enabled the generation or creation of that work. So it's a whole interesting area to make that make sense. But generally, make sure there's some sort of human input. Make sure that it's used as a tool in the same way as a paintbrush might be, rather than just allowing it to do it all by itself.
Yeah, I mean, quite rightly so, all of these questions are being asked at the moment, and new laws are having to be formed. That's the only thing we can do, because it's so new.
Absolutely, and working out new economic methods. I was talking to a big photo shutterbox, a big photo library, which licenses images and so on and so forth. And they say they're going to get a process where they can identify all the different images that have been used to feed their AI machine. And they now basically are offering AI-created imagery under license. I raised the issue with them, however, that if it's built upon millions of photographs, the royalties that they're going to get divided between those millions of copyright owners is going to be pretty piddlingly small, isn't it?
It really is. But I suppose it's an acknowledgement of ownership. That's yes, rather than a means of making money. Andrew,
it's both on that.
Thank you very much indeed. Andrew Eborn there, futurist, barrister and podcaster. Stay with us. We're talking movies next.
The home of common sense, talk radio and talk TV.